Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Harper, and I'm a safety consultant with Kentucky Safe. And in this webinar, over 29 CFR 1910-147, which pertains to the control of hazardous energy, commonly known as lockout tagout. Before we get into the material, take a moment to read our disclaimer. This webinar is designed to cover the basics of lockout tagout as they pertain to 1910-147. As such, reviewing this webinar alone will not make you competent or qualified person or authorized to perform lockout tagout. Lockout tagout, as it pertains to 1910-147, refers to the specific practices and procedures to safeguard employees from the unexpected energization or startup of machinery and equipment, or the release of hazardous energy during servicing and or maintenance activities. 29 CFR 1910-147 does not cover the following: construction activities, which is contained in Part 1926. It doesn't cover anything in the agricultural industry, which is covered in Part 1928. It doesn't cover any work pertaining to power transmission, generation, or distribution. That is contained in 1910, but specifically in Section 269. It doesn't cover any work where the employee is exposed to just electrical hazards. Those activities would be covered under Subpart S of 1910, specifically in 1910, Section 333. Doesn't cover anything in the oil and gas well drilling and servicing. And finally, it doesn't cover any cord or plug powered equipment, provided that unplugging the equipment completely de-energizes and isolates any hazardous energy pertaining to the equipment, and the plug remains under the exclusive control of the employee performing the servicing and or maintenance, meaning that the employee has the authority to and is continuously in a position to prevent, exclude other individuals from re-energizing the machine or equipment during his servicing and or maintenance activity. Lockout tagout is needed when employees are performing servicing or maintenance activities on machines and or equipment. OSHA defines servicing and or maintenance as workplace activities such as constructing, installing, setting up, adjusting, inspecting, modifying, and maintaining and or servicing machines or equipment. These activities include lubrication, cleaning, or unjamming of machines or equipment, and making adjustment or tool changes where the employee or employees may be exposed to the unexpected energization or startup of the equipment or release of hazardous energy. Lockout tagout is typically not required during normal production operations unless an employee or employees is required to remove or bypass a guard or safety device, or required to place any part of their body into the point of operation, or enter a danger zone that exists during the machine operating cycle. These are some examples of hazardous energies that employees could be exposed to. And over the next couple of slides, we'll be showing you some examples of those hazardous energies, as well as some of their sources that they can be coming from. So the first one is electrical. This can be powered via electrical panel, a disconnect, which we'll talk about those. You've got hydraulic hazardous energy, such as pressurized hydraulic fluid on a machine. You've got pneumatic or air, which could be from a pressurized airline on a machine. You've got gravity. This is commonly associated with power presses or where you've got suspended parts on a machine that can come down and potentially crush the employee performing the service or maintenance activity. You've got mechanical. This could be chains and sprockets or flywheels, belts and pulleys on a machine. You've got chemical hazardous energy. This could be from chemical vats or pipes with corrosives. You've got thermal hazardous energy. This is commonly associated with facilities that have ovens. Okay, next, here's some examples of energy isolating devices used to isolate or sever hazardous energy from the machines or equipment. You have electrical disconnects and breakers for isolating electrical hazardous energy. The picture in the upper right is known as a ball valve, which is commonly used to isolate pneumatic hazardous energy, as well as types of fluid and or gaseous energies. The picture in the bottom right is a gate valve, which is used for the types of liquid hazardous energies. Control circuit devices such as interlocks used in machine guarding are not considered energy isolating devices as they do not isolate power. Commonly referred to as being one and the same, lockout tagout is actually two different practices of isolating hazardous energy. Lockout is the practice of applying a lock to an energy isolating device. Tagout is applying an awareness device, such as a tag, to an energy isolating device. 1910-147 states that if an energy isolating device is capable of being locked out, the employer shall utilize lockout unless the employer can demonstrate that the utilization of a tagout system will provide the same amount of protection. Some additional means to be considered as part of the demonstration of full employee protection regarding tagout shall include the implementation of the additional safety measures, such as the removal of an isolating circuit element, the blocking of a controlling switch, opening of an extra disconnecting device, or the removal of a valve handle to reduce the likelihood of inadvertently energizing the machine. Kentucky has a more protective requirement, 803 KAR 2309, that requires lockout if an energy isolating device is capable of being locked out. Pursuant to House Bill 398 of the 2025 regular session and subsequent amendment to Kentucky Revised Statute 338-62, effective June 27th, 2025. The requirement is not enforced in the private sector. The requirement remains applicable in the public sector. That being said, employees are better protected when a private sector employer adheres to 803 KAR 2309 and utilizes a lock. Here are some examples of locks, tags, and lockout devices. Lockout and tagout devices need to be standardized in at least one of the following: color, shape, or size. The tags must be standardized by print and format. All must be provided by the employer. Lockout devices and tagout devices shall indicate the identity of the employee applying the device or devices, need to be durable enough to withstand their environment, need to be used only for the purpose of lockout or tagout. For example, you cannot use your locks for lockout on lockable interlocks. Another lock, perhaps a different color or style, would need to be introduced into your program. It would need to indicate that lock is not being used for lockout. Under 1910-147, an employer is required to establish an energy control program for the purposes of lockout tagout. OSHA requires that an energy control program shall include, at a minimum, energy control procedures for the machines that require them, that employers conduct periodic inspections on those procedures, and that training is provided to employees that fall under 1910-147. Next, we will be discussing these requirements, starting with energy control procedures. 1910-147 requires that an employer develop energy control procedures for machines and or equipment unless an 8-step exemption is met. That exemption being, the machine or equipment has no potential for stored or residual energy or reaccumulation of stored energy after shutdown, has a single energy source easily to identify and isolate. The isolation and locking of that energy source will achieve a lockout state. The machine or equipment is isolated during servicing or maintenance. A single lockout device will achieve a lockout condition. The lockout device is under the exclusive control of the authorized employee performing the servicing or maintenance. The servicing or maintenance does not create hazards for other employees. The employer, in utilizing this exception, has had no accidents involving the unexpected activation or re-energization of the machine or equipment during servicing or maintenance. If a procedure needs to be developed, OSHA requires that the energy control procedures need to include topics such as the scope and purpose of the procedure, who is authorized to perform it, rules for violating lockout tagout. OSHA states in its compliance directive for lockout tagout that if these topics are included in a plant-wide policy and that the policy is communicated to employees, then they do not need to include these in the procedure. In addition, procedures need to include steps on how to shut down the machine or equipment, how to isolate and or block hazardous energies powering the machine or equipment, or is stored residual energy remaining after shutdown, the number and type of locks and lockout devices, if devices are required, and how to verify that the machine or equipment has been placed in the energy isolated state. As far as how the format looks, OSHA gives employers the flexibility to develop their own format around these required topics. What I recommend is that employers make their procedures detailed enough for employees to effectively place that machine or equipment in an energy isolated state, yet not too detailed as to discourage employees from using it. Though it is not required, pictures help in simplifying the procedure. Multiple machines can be grouped under one procedure, provided that they are similar enough that employees can take the procedures and successfully perform lockout, tagout on those machines. A good starting point for employers looking at developing energy control procedures is the example procedure developed by OSHA and is contained in Appendix A of 1910-147. And so over the next couple of slides, I will then show you what 147 Appendix A looks like. But you can find that by going on to OSHA's website, and it is actually contained in 1910-147 towards the end. But as you can see here, here's the first part of it. So we'll go on, we'll transition. And so again, it's a very good starting point. If again, you don't have an energy control procedure, you at least want to make sure you get the at least the basic requirements. This is a good starting place. The one thing, again, I do want to mention, though, is this is just an example procedure. There are some things that as a employer, you will have to tailor to your own process. And you can see some of those on this slide, such as naming potentially the employees involved, the types and magnitudes for the hazardous energy associated with the equipment. So again, you will have to tailor this to the machine. You can't just simply print this off, stick it on that machine or stick it in your program and be fully compliant. Okay, so that's towards the end of the example procedure in Appendix A. Again, that can be found on OSHA's website in section 147. But moving along, we'll be moving into periodic inspections. So 1910-147 requires that inspections be performed on energy control procedures at least annually. The inspection needs to include at least the employee who performed the procedure and an employee that will act as the inspector. As the employee performs the procedure, the inspector will look for any inadequacies or deviations regarding the procedure. The inspection needs to be documented and identify the machine or equipment, the employee or employees performing the procedure, and the inspector. According to OSHA's compliance directive for lockout tagout, OSHA recognizes that some employers choose to develop machine-specific energy control procedures for individual machines or pieces of equipment. Because this approach provides the optimum level of detail, enhancing overall employee safety during servicing operations. In order to not discourage this practice, employers who develop energy control procedures for individual machines still may group the same or similar individual machine or equipment procedures for periodic inspection purposes. The inspection results can be shared with authorized and affected employees not included in the inspection during group meetings. In 1910-147, employees can be divided into three types: authorized, affected, and other. An authorized employee locks out or tags out machines or equipment in order to perform servicing or maintenance on that machine or equipment. This can be maintenance employees, operators, etc. Anyone that is required to perform servicing or maintenance and is required to lock out the machine or equipment. These employees are required to be trained on the recognition of applicable energy sources, the types and magnitude of those sources in their workplace, the methods and means to isolate and control these energy sources, So in other words, they need to be trained on what lockout tagout is, what type of locks and lockout devices the employer has, how to interpret the energy control procedure for machines or equipment they are assigned to, such as the hazardous energies pertaining to them and how to isolate them. An infected employee is one who operates the machines and or equipment that lockout tagout is performed on or required to be in the area. This would most likely be an operator. They would need to be at least trained on the energy control procedure for their machine or equipment. If an infected employee is required to perform an activity that would require lockout tagout, then they would need to be trained as a authorized employee. Other employees include those who may be in an area where energy control procedures may be utilized. For example, these could be management, employees walking through the area, or material handlers. Other employees need to be trained on the basics of the energy control procedure and to not bother equipment that is locked out or tagged out. In 1910-147, OSHA requires that the employer provide retraining when there is a change in the authorized and or affected employee's job, or there's a change in the machines, or there's a change in the energy control procedures. OSHA also requires that both initial and retraining to be documented and include the name of the employee or employees trained and the dates of training. In 1910-147D, OSHA mentions the process of performing lockout tagout in 6 steps. Next, we'll be discussing each of these steps, starting with the first one. The first is prepare for shutdown. In this step, authorized employees should have been trained in lockout tagout for the machine and or equipment that they are going to be performing servicing and or maintenance on. They need to ensure that the energy control procedure for the machine or equipment has been reviewed, gather locks, tags, and lockout devices required, and notify all affected employees. In the next step, the authorized employee will shut down the machine or equipment using its normal shutdown procedure. After shutting the machine or equipment down, the authorized employee will identify the energy isolating devices associated with the machine and will use them to isolate the hazardous energies from the machine or equipment. Some examples include switching off electrical disconnects, turning air shutoffs, switching off breakers, and turning valves. After isolating the hazardous energies from the equipment, the authorized employee will apply their locks and or lockout devices to the energy isolating devices. Next, the authorized employee will release and or block any stored or residual energy remaining in the machine or equipment. For example, this could be discharging capacitors, block or releasing springs, blocking elevated parts, such as dies on a power press, stopping rotating flywheels, relieving system pressure, draining fluids, venting gases, or allowing a hot system to cool. The picture shows a die block, which is a device used to isolate the gravity energy source on a press. In the bottom most photos, Those are some examples of bleeder valves that could be used to either bleed fluids, such as hydraulic fluids. The last step of lockout tagout is verifying that equipment has been isolated and hazardous energies for that equipment have been controlled. This is typically accomplished by checking and ensuring all employees are out of the area, checking that all lockout devices are securely in place, attempting normal startup, or visually verifying by looking at gauges, using testing equipment, etc. After verification has been completed, the machine controls would be returned to the off or neutral position, and then the authorized employee may perform servicing and or maintenance. OSHA allows the temporary removal of lockout tagout for the purposes of testing or positioning machine and equipment. An example of this would be during die setting operations. When lockout tagout devices must be temporarily removed for testing and or positioning, the authorized employee must clear the machine of tools, remove employees from the hazardous areas in and around the machine, remove lockout and tagout devices. They can then re-energize and test. If additional servicing and or maintenance is required, the machine or equipment must be de-energized and energy control procedures must be reapplied. After servicing and or maintenance activity has been completed on the equipment, the authorized employee will release it from lockout tagout to normal production operations. This process involves inspecting the work area and the machinery or equipment, ensuring all machine guards are in place, moving tools away from the equipment, informing others of startup. The authorized employee would then remove locks and tags and conduct normal startup operations. There are times when servicing and or maintenance activities may require more than one authorized employee and therefore would require a group lockout tagout. In these cases, a primary authorized employee must be designated for the group. The role of the primary authorized employee is to ensure that every employee that enters into the hazardous areas of the machine or equipment is out of those areas prior to lockout tagout being removed. Typically, group lockout tagout is performed by one of the employees in the group having enough locks and or lockout devices for the machines or equipment. That employee will then perform the steps outlined in the energy control procedure for the machine or equipment. During this process, the employee will place one of their locks on a group lockout device. The configuration of this device may vary on the amount of employees involved in the process. After the initial employee performs the initial lockout tagout for the machine or equipment, each additional employee involved will perform the steps outlined in the energy control procedure for the machine or equipment. After performing those steps, additional employees will place their personal lock on the group lockout device. To remove the machine or equipment from group lockout tagout, the steps would need to be reversed, starting with the additional employees and ending with the initial employee. Who can remove locks and tags? There should only be two people that can remove locks and tags. That is the authorized employee who placed the lock and or tag, or a representative of the employer after following a written company removal procedure that must include at least the following: verification that the authorized employee who applied the device is not in the facility, have made all reasonable efforts to contact the authorized employee to inform them that their lockout tagout device has been removed, and ensuring that the authorized employee has this knowledge before they resume work at the facility. OSHA requires specific procedures be utilized during shift or personnel changes to ensure the continuity of lockout or tagout protection, including provisions for the orderly transfer of lockout or tagout device protection between offgoing and oncoming employees to minimize exposure to hazards from the unexpected energization or startup of the equipment or the release of stored energy. All on-site or host employers and outside employers shall be communicating their lockout tagout procedures. As the on-site employer, you would be considered a controlling employer under OSHA's multi-employer worksite policy. The controlling employer is responsible for ensuring subcontractors on their worksite are following 1910-147. The performance-oriented nature of the standard permits the outside contractor employer to use either the host employer's energy control procedure, which some companies will require, its own procedures, or a combination of the two procedures, provided the resulting procedure meets the requirements of the lockout tagout standard. The contractor can also be part of a group lockout if the host employer prohibits outside personnel from performing the initial lockout. In this case, the contractor would apply their lock onto a group lockout device. The last topic we will be discussing is vehicle hazardous energy. Vehicles such as automobiles and related equipment are covered under 1910-147, while employees are performing service and or maintenance activities. Examples of hazardous energy include chemical energy due to contact with battery acid, coolant, and or lubricants, electric battery shock, arc, or burn hazards, hydraulic hazards associated with fluid pressure and fluid loss, mechanical hazards associated with the unexpected startup or unexpected energization of vehicles and or vehicle components. OSHA requires employers develop energy control procedures and provide training pertaining to the machines and equipment. Due to the nature and unique aspects of vehicle maintenance and servicing activities, OSHA recognizes that there are feasible measures to prevent an employee from being exposed to hazardous energy. Measures could be pulling the ignition key from the equipment and keeping it under the exclusive control of the unauthorized employee, or using a lockout device on a battery terminal, or using blocking devices on suspended parts such as jack stands. Further information about this can be found in OSHA's compliance directive pertaining to lockout tagout. This concludes the webinar pertaining to lockout tagout. A great resource that I used while I was a compliance officer and currently as a consultant is the compliance directive for lockout tagout. The directive was created to assist compliance officers in determining if an employer was compliant with 1910-147, but it has a lot of useful information and guidance that employers can use to comply with the regulations. The directive can be found on OSHA.gov, which we have a QR code at the top. If you scan that link, it'll take you to the CPL, or if you just put the CPL number into a search engine, usually it's one of the first couple links. But very useful document. Another useful tool that OSHA developed was their e-tool pertaining to lockout tagout. Again, a lot of useful information in that tool. So again, you can either scan the QR code, the second one, or you can simply just, if you were to search for it on a search engine, it should appear as one of the first couple links. And then finally, we attached the QR code to Appendix A. Again, that is the example energy control procedure that employers can reference. But other than that, if you have any questions pertaining to this webinar, below you will also find my contact information. But other than that, thanks for watching. For more free online learning opportunities, please visit our website. But again, thanks for watching this webinar.